Hi everyone, I'm Dean Ramsey. I'm Principal Analyst at TM Forum. I'm here at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. It's a very busy show. I'm joined by Val and Nick from Enghouse Networks. How's the show going for you guys so far?
Very busy, very interesting trends, interesting tension as well within the industry and hyperscalers and interesting discussions, regulators and so on. Very busy for us, lots of customers and lots of validation for what we see as our next stage in the evolution of our offering.
I agree. I think for me the key thing is there's still a lot of growth, a lot of interest in the traditional telecommunications environment, but increasingly we're also seeing a lot of interest in digital transformation, things happening in other verticals, whether it's agriculture, it's mining, it's healthcare and other areas. And the intersection of what's happening in those areas with what's happening in the telecommunications network, that's really where I think a lot of the interest is going forwards.
Yeah, so I suppose that's one of the big themes of the show with velocity and growth, be that revenue growth or growth of endpoints or the reach of the telco industry. So I guess the telco industry is at the point where traditional telco services are not seeing a great deal of growth. So operators are going on this journey of business diversification, partnership ecosystems, things that we're not particularly used to. What are you seeing in terms of success areas and kind of models of changing the way that we work to drive that growth?
I think we start to see growth areas and trends and always happen at the edge. Mm-hmm. Start from somewhere where you kind of don't expect. You see that there is something out there, but you can't put your finger on it quite clearly yet. I think we are at that stage. I think we see emerging trends in growth in telco. As an industry, we've been able to scale. We've been able to connect every person and a lot of devices at a global scale, so we should be proud of that. Our next stage in the evolution of where the industry is going is to make everything that we have built, that whole infrastructure, to make it programmatic, making available, and make it scalable. So that, and build an ecosystem, as you have said, right? And we can think about areas and devices and markets where telcos, in the way they are built today, they can elevate their skill set. The partnerships that they are used to make, the partnerships at the local level, at the city level, municipality, regulators, where they have very good relationships and capability, and with vendors like us, to scale up into markets that can be interesting for them at a large scale. And for everything else to enable an ecosystem of partners, of developers, to build a use case that we don't know yet about. We imagine the metaverse, we imagine many other things, but who knows what's coming next, right? We just have to enable that, and it has to be available, it has to be affordable as well. Mm-hmm. All of that connectivity that we are good at building, us as an industry.
I think also, from some of the conversations I've been having this week with operators, is exactly to your point, that they may not know exactly what the killer use case is that's coming on the horizon. But the process of putting the steps in place to have an architecture and an ecosystem that is super flexible, that allows them to pivot to address hundreds or thousands of different use cases is what they're doing at the moment. That's where their investment strategy lies.
I think one of the things we'll also see, and it sort of builds on what Val said in terms of enabling, there's a lot of enabling technology now, and we're starting to see at this show and other shows, people starting to take advantage of that enablement, and there's sort of innovators, entrepreneurs, people who are sort of getting into niches, and they're the people who are actually starting to put this misty fog that's in front of us and actually get some clarity by identifying what actually are the growth areas. So those are some of the areas where I think we'll certainly support our existing environments, but some of the new entrants, the people that are building new business cases, value models, that are actually testing and proving some of these areas, that's an area where we're also focused on. And over time, those will either become standalone areas or the operators will start to incorporate those into their overall solution. So I don't think it's necessarily the telecommunications operators themselves who have to do all of the innovation. It's going to come from outside, and then the telecommunications operators have to decide, is that something that over time folds into their offer, or something that over time they continue as an enabler for those innovators.
I totally agree, and that responsibility doesn't have to lie with the operators, and I think that, but what the responsibility they do have is to put in place a platform on which innovators can easily interact with the telco and with that ecosystem of partners that they maybe haven't interacted with at all before. There are many verticals that are still ready to be addressed, and we're on the cusp of having all the tools to be able to do that. So I think they need to be able to provide an environment for innovation.
Let's pick an example. Try to build on that we spoke in the abstract. So, let's take IoT, right? What is IoT? Is it one market? Is it one size fits all, massive machine-to-machine communication? Is that what's going to happen? Well, yes or no. Where is a telco ready to play? Well, I'll pick an example like smart sewers. It's one of the largest assets that a municipality owns. It sits on their books and they have issues with it, right? They have to invest in it, climate change, more flooding, all sorts of issues. Is that an area that a telco can scale into and build an offering that can apply to all cities? Smart city, right? There are other applications into the municipal arena where, I don't know, some type of an interesting air quality at the micro level, at the building level, where telcos have towers, for example, and somebody can use that infrastructure to mount their sensors, connect programmatically into what the telco offers, and then build a specialized service into it. And then, yes, to Mick's point, if that scales and becomes the next killer app, then maybe a telco should do it as well.
Yeah. And I think as a company, we're also seeing that. We're probably seeing it more in private networks, 5G private networks, people starting to innovate, sort of in first responder type areas with IoT, with their devices. We start to learn from that, figure out what works, what doesn't work. How do you enable that type of environment? And then apply that technology to the solutions that we also provide for telecommunications operators, so that essentially you can support the core telecommunications, the new emerging areas, and then over time, it doesn't really matter any combination or permutation of the above. I think the key thing that all of this does, though, is as innovation occurs, it impacts scale. It impacts the number of endpoints, it impacts the amount of traffic that's going across the network. It also, because the different segments have different requirements, it can also impact the way in which you need to set yourself up to serve those things.
And so growth in that sense of scaling up to be able to address these and have the right cost structures in place to make margin on all of these things and provide a societal benefit. It's something that's beyond the understanding of a telco that's used to just providing cell phones and smartphones to consumers, and so I feel that lots of the success stories I've seen around IoT solutions have often been partnership models with companies that understand that vertical very well. So it's the age of a telco going it alone to provide a service is kind of over, and I think that's what seems to be one of the themes of the show.
There's also a velocity thing, velocity in terms of business, because businesses are changing, the velocity of things are changing. They sort of take 20 years to build a solid, robust silver knobs, brass knobs type of service. That's not happening. You're starting to see things change in sort of internet speed now. You want to have things turned up in days or weeks, not months or years. So I think the velocity of change, in addition to the scale of change, is another theme that's important in this context.
Being able to innovate at the business level, at the business offering level. So velocity in terms of offering, in terms of being agile and being able to change what you are doing. Where if we look at telephony, if we look at mobile broadband and so on, these are offerings that are clear. They scaled very well, but they are static in their core value proposition, right? Telcos need to partner to be able to innovate there as well and have all of the infrastructure and systems and transparency and scale to be able to support change at the business level and velocity at the business level as well.
Yes, and I guess that if we're thinking about supporting change at that speed, where if you think about like Chat GPT and the way that the versions are coming along so quickly, it's an iterative pace that we're not used to keeping up with as an industry. But if we're to diversify our business, we're moving into competitive landscapes that are very different to what we're used to, and companies who are already there, these are not greenfield opportunities. We're moving into competitive landscapes where other companies are moving at extreme pace. So we need to adopt some of those characteristics and mindset. Maybe it's kind of maybe not entirely a technology discussion. It's a structure of your company and the mindset of the leadership.
It's a cultural discussion. A cultural discussion where the culture needs to change as well and evolve inside of a telco to be able to address those things. But at the same time, telcos have a unique skill set. We manage vendor ecosystems very well. We manage entire supply chains that are extremely complex very well. When they transition the border between physical and digital, so software, but also digital assets, and physical assets that are so important to be able to maintain for our infrastructure, and relationships at the regulatory, government, local, municipality level, and those types of businesses and types of relationships are not easy to replicate for a business. So as an industry, we can leverage those assets we have, those capabilities, to be able to foster this new ecosystem of innovation. And that is not something where a digital hyperscaler will go easily into.
We've seen, we've already seen telcos start to make that transition, that velocity transition in certain segments. Not, I would say today, not across the board. We work, for example, in IPTV solutions, where you're now delivering TV not to a set-top box, not building it so that in 3 years' time you can offer service, but rather offering it to apps, to mobile phones, to smart TVs, as well as to set-top boxes. The velocity of that industry is measured in days and weeks. You post in the App Store, say every 4 weeks or every 6 weeks, there's a new update. 3-4 years ago, when we started working with operators in that environment, it's completely culturally different to what they normally expect. They're pushing back against that. They're screaming and kicking about it and saying, we can't do it that way. We have to test for 6 months, 12 months before I can release a new release. You can't work like that in the new environment. We now see in that particular segment, maybe 3-4 years later, they have embraced that, they have adopted that, and that's now the norm for the people we work with in that segment. And I think the other parts of telco that are still not got the processes, the procedures, the practices in place, the people's mindset in place for that pace of change, I think that is changing and has to change to really enable the opportunities from this new environment.
That's cultural change. That's exactly. So a cultural change in this case fostered by abilities we had to change the offering and its pace of evolution.
But it does mean that the technologies that you provide underpinning that culture also have to be enablers for that type of cultural change as well.